Hello and welcome back to FANFICreations, your podcast for fanfic addicts and writers. Today this is our very first roundtable discussion. What we would like to do is we would like to bring more of you guys as our guests to discuss some of the topics that fanfic writers run into. Today we have two awesome guests to kick us off, so let's hear from them.
Hi guys, my name is Dominemm. I have been into fanfiction for a little over 10 years now, reading and writing. I go across all fandoms, but mostly I work in the Avengers, Harry Potter, and Naruto.
Okay, so hello everyone, I am Skoddy. I write mostly for, or only for Hetalia right now, it's an anime, and I mostly read for anime like One Piece, Haikyuu, and others.
So today's topic is mixing languages and mixing dialects while writing. We've seen several fanfictions that would either have one character speak in their mother tongue in the middle of the fanfiction and include translations probably in the footnotes of the chapter. We've seen other people who mix dialects. The discussion started around whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Does it take away from the reading experience or not?
I feel like, frankly, when dealing with different dialects, different languages even, you have to use a really light hand, especially if you're writing in like English or whatever the source material language is. I feel like, no one wants to be taken out of the experience by having to translate everything, or if just something sounds like awkward to read, like you have to take into consideration your audience. But I do think it can add some authenticity, especially a lot of times if you're writing for anime and you want to add a suffix or you want to add, certain Japanese phrases. I feel like that's okay, but the whole thing shouldn't be complete sentences in a different language. That it just sounds like you're trying too hard to me.
Well, I actually did the one thing about mixing dialect in one of my fanfics, and basically when you write Sweden within Hetalia, he's categorized as mumbling often, and people have this one stereotype of writing his mumbled speech, which should take out like some of his letters, which sound more mumbled. But I found that to be a kind of bad to do because you have often no idea what he says then, and you often have to go to footnotes and ask, or just ask the author, what did he say here and what did he say there. That can like ruin the fic for you. I haven't been going back to fix that yet. I just let it be like that. It's my own mistake that I put up there.
So I guess in your experience, Kari, it's not just mixing languages; it's also mixing dialects, which can confuse people.
Yeah, it will be confusing quickly.
Did you see good examples of how people did it, or bad examples? You don't have to say the story's name, by the way. Just what have you seen as a reader?
When I made the discussion on the Reddit board and I was talking about Thor in the Avengers fandom and how because he's from Asgard and because it's this like kind of ancient Norse thing, he speaks a certain way, and I'm not denying that he speaks a certain way, but people, I feel like they don't realize that things don't translate as well from visually watching and hearing something to reading it, and it can get really obnoxious. So they'll have him saying, thou and thus and and they're trying to make it, I guess, authentic. But point A, he really, even if you watch the movies, he's not that obnoxious about it. And B, it doesn't sound good. So you got two different, I think people follow the stereotype of a fandom. They feel like everyone else is doing it, so that's what's right to do. But that's not necessarily what the source material is doing. And I see that happen a lot with his character, and it's annoying because he's a really interesting character to write. And if you get in the habit of writing him obnoxious and loud and stupid, then no one wants to get into it.
I've seen a lot of examples in my fandom, Natalia, where people, for example, write England, and he is categorized as this British type, like a posh accent. But sometimes they change it up and give him the more street, you could say. They often just say, oh, he talked English street way. And I was like, what does that mean? And sometimes they just, oh, the Englishman spoke English to the other Englishman. I was like, oh, you don't say. In England, I presume? I've read a lot of fanfiction about they are on the airport. And often they just talk. And I was like, okay, are they talking English now, French, or, Portuguese? Because you don't specify, and they're on the airport. It's hard to know. where people are from then. I've seen good examples with like how people mix languages, because like you have, for example, the Nordics, which often they know each other's languages somewhat, and they can like often like Norway would know what often Denmark is saying, but Sweden would have no idea. And they use that in such a way that is like it's beautiful.
Do they mix it with English, or is it for audiences that know the languages?
They say, for example, Denmark mumbled whatever under his speech, and then Norway commented to Sweden, "Oh, he said this."
Ah, okay.
Oh.
So like they just specify that he used Danish, but then they don't like go back and say he said this in. Yeah, they don't like write in Danish. They just say he said it in Danish.
There were also a question from one of the listeners is, does it matter, like, would it make a difference if you are bilingual or like as a writer, or like, for example, there is one story that one listener brought as an example, which is, I think it was a Yu-Gi-Oh fanfiction, and there was a character who is fluent in Arabic. And what happened was the writer didn't know Arabic, so they were using, I think, Google Translate or something. So what ended up happening is the words sounded right to someone who doesn't speak Arabic, but for the audiobook readers, they pointed out that most of the pronouns were actually wrong. So instead of saying dad or something, it was your dad all the time. It didn't sound right. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of what I was saying earlier, like know your target audience. And I even think what Scotty was saying, like, you can just say he said it in Arabic. You don't have to Google Translate and then translate it in English at the bottom of the chapter. Like, just say he said this in Arabic, or you put it in italics and then make a note. Italics means that this was said in Arabic. That's all you have to do. Like, that makes it much tidier, and then you don't have to, I'm not like scrolling up and down for random translations. And then especially if you're not bilingual and you're probably saying something wrong, which happens in anime across the board. People want to do whole sentences in Japanese, and I'm like, the grammar on that is not right.
If you're writing a fic or an original piece and you start using Google Translate, you're doing it wrong, in my opinion. Like, you can rather go like to other people, like you can go to message board like Reddit, or you're on Tumblr, or like ask people you know the language, like, hey, can you translate this for me? Can you get this grammar to seem right for both people who don't know it and people who do know it?
That's actually a really good point. So instead of writing it on your own, pair up with someone who speaks that language.
And I know how hard that is, because I'm writing a fic right now where I need a lot of like Chinese thing written, because it will just look better on the page. It will of course have translation, you could say, but it will be a lot. But to find like one person who speaks Cantonese and who can translate this one word for me has been like the most hardest thing for me to do so far in fanfiction writing.
Yeah, maybe we need like I don't know, like some place in like the fanfiction subreddit or some place like that for people to match up.
Translations, that would be a good idea.
Because like some things, like for example, you can translate like some words that are like not in English, for example. But other words are better if you just say it in their language, like sushi. You don't translate sushi to raw fish or raw fish rolls or something like that. You just say sushi because most people know what that is. You have other words which you can translate because people don't know what that is, for example.
The key with translation is like use it when it's necessary. Like if something, like you were saying in your fic, it looks better if it's Chinese, so you need to write it in Chinese. But the whole thing doesn't need to be in Chinese. Like,
no.
But I don't know what's happening. I think a lot of people want to be authentic or something like that, and it really, really happens in all anime fandom. Whole sentences in Japanese. Like, why? The entire sentence doesn't need to be in Japanese.
In the anime fandom, when they use like the honorifics, because that makes sense, because only often like Japanese culture have that kind of language in their names, you could say. But like you don't say, oh, big brother Didrik, please be my whatever. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, it doesn't
like Oni-chan sounds better because everyone knows what they mean. Like, don't mean it in that way.
Basically use the other language, or use the mother tongue if it's something specific to that culture. So one listener, actually, I think she's also a writer, brought up a scenario that she ran into, which is What happens if you have a recent immigrant character? They're still like getting used to English or something like that. Do you ignore that so that so it's easier for the reader? Do you put in just a few words here and there? Do you make them go into the other language completely if they are like angry or lose temper or something like that? How would you go about handling that?
I feel like for me, I would go more in specific, like show how they, for example, struggle with certain words when they, for example, in Norwegian, when the KJ sound come up. Like that's a hard part for many people to learn. Like show that instead of like going like, oh, he tried to say this one word but it didn't work for him.
Make him mumble or something?
Yeah, make him mumble, show that he's struggling. He's like trying to say the word over and over again to learn it himself or herself.
Yeah, tell the story. If they're an immigrant or if they're struggling to learn the language, like you can totally like use words that they would use. I don't think anyone thinks we're trying to say the entire thing has to be in English or whatever language the fic is being written in. You can describe his struggles or her struggles. You can describe like what he's saying. You know, we have adjectives for reasons. I think people are caught up in being like super authentic about everything, and it doesn't need to be that way. As long as the reader understands what's going on, you should use as much or as little as you want.
It depends on which point of view you're writing. If you're like, if the immigrant is not the point of view, but like their friend, then maybe you can show like if he gets angry and he starts shouting in his own mother tongue, then maybe show how he got angry, how he started shouting in whatever she cannot understand. Show like it in that way. It's not like type it all out what he said, because often she would not understand it because maybe it's not her language as her friend, as their friend. If you're writing from his point of view, the immigrant, then maybe show that, oh, like if it's first person, wow, why is Swedish so hard to say? Why can't I just say this sentence so easily? But in Swedish, it becomes like mumbled words in S and J's and stuff I cannot pronounce.
So we actually had one of our followers, their name is Eternally Daydreaming, and they shared a fanfic that they wrote back in 2012 or something. It is a Ninja Turtles fic, and it revolves around Splinter, the coach, right? Yes. Who is Japanese, right? And he was a recent immigrant, and what they did was they made him speak Japanese because Japanese is a very comfortable zone for him, especially when he's not interacting with Americans. What they ended up doing was whenever he's speaking to the baby turtles that he's raising, right, he would end up speaking English and mix in some of the typical Japanese words, especially like sorry, stop that. Basically, he would easily forget to translate in his head. So they didn't do it all the time, but they did it when, like, especially in connecting words like and or stuff like that.
That's normal. That's a normal process. If you have anyone whose parents are not from wherever, like let's say I'm in America and, you know, my parents were from Mexico, then they would, you know, speak Spanish because that's where they're from, but, you know, they would also still be trying to learn English, so it would be kind of like a Spanglish. It would be a mix. Like that happens with any immigrant parents or something like that. When something else is their mother tongue, they do speak it to their children. That's not super unnormal.
I feel like as long as they are specific about the words, like if you are repeating a certain word often enough, then people will learn, okay, that means sorry in Japanese. So when that word comes up, I know he's saying sorry because they addressed it before that.
So limit the vocabulary, limit the use or limit the frequency.
Yeah, like don't throw 50 words in and expect the readers to know every word.
Yes, I think my golden rule would be there's no point where there should be an entire paragraph in a different language unless there's a very good reason, like an extremely good reason why a character is speaking a completely different language for more than like a few sentences max. That's my rule.
That's actually a really good tip. Golden rule right there.
Good golden rule. I feel like if you first decide to put in like language as a plot point or like as a story idea in your story, then explore that more, because if people know more than one language, it's fun to know like do they know the dialect, do they speak that type of accent, like specify such things, because then you give the character more meat on their bones, you could say.
So explore the culture, not just a few words.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess one last thing that we mentioned earlier is if you can find someone who speaks that language fluently, try to pair up. or at least have them like fix any grammar issues or any pronouns or anything like that that will take from the experience for someone who speaks that language natively.
Yeah.
So that is the end of our very first episode. We are gonna adjust the lengths moving forward depending on how people want to go about this, whether they want it longer or shorter. It was really, really, really awesome to have you guys with us today. And I'm sure like a lot of people will find the tips that you guys said very, very, very useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah.